This will be a talk on why young people today are really getting harmed, mistreated by the older generation. And this example occurred within this local Christian coffee shop where I went to visit with the person who ran it. I was there, and it's a perfect model of what's happening to the young people, and has happened throughout history. So I'm there on the Sabbath, the seventh day of the week, and they're open for business, and they're selling their coffee and tea and other drinks and food that is filled with preservatives. And we were discussing Christian principles. And this is a talk on how, if the young people actually knew some of the principles that Jesus Christ taught, they wouldn't be so readily misused, exploited by older people. Jesus did say, "Suffer the children, allow the children to come unto me, for of such is the kingdom of God." And if young people actually knew what Jesus taught, they would be able to be healthier and have a much better, a more abundant life. But the old people, the people with authority in that, they tend to force the younger generation into doing the same thing that they're doing. And so as I'm sitting there in this Christian coffee shop, and we have been discussing how older people are coerced into doing things by society as a whole. So you have middle-aged or young men and young women in their 30s being coerced to do things by even older people. It's because, that's our tradition, and people have got position and power, and you go along to get along, and you got to earn a living, right? And so this actually, as a group of teenagers came in. They had 4 chaperones for adults into this Christian coffee shop. And the young people are buying drinks, and this one young lady, a teenager, just started high school. She's buying this coffee, and she makes this comment. They're from Michigan. She said, "I don't usually buy this stuff. I don't like it. But, I gotta stay awake." And she had on this shirt that says, "If I want your opinion, I will ask you for it." And so I asked her, "Well, do you mind if I say something? I ask you some questions?" "Yeah, go ahead." I says, why are you so tired?" "Well, we're on this vacation, this trip, and we've got the schedule the adults set. And we've got to see all these different churches in all this different time. And, we stay up late, and then they make us get up early. Because, teenagers, their sleep cycles are such that they stay up later and they get up later. Naturally. That's nature. And adults know that. They know the sleep cycle of children. They know the sleep cycle of infants. We know the sleep cycle of teenagers. We know the sleep cycle of adults. We've known it for thousands of years. I mean, even King Solomon wrote that, the old people, in Ecclesiastes, the 20 or so, he talks about old people rising up, at the crowing of the you know, before the birds even. And I guess I'm getting older because it's easier to get up at 3:42 in the morning. Whereas teenagers, you know, they just probably went to bed 4 hours ago, and getting up at 4 o'clock or 5 o'clock in the morning is kind of insane to them because they have a different sleep cycle. So we do all of these unnatural things, and adults are getting teenagers, you know, we gotta go see all these churches, but we're not respecting the natural sleep cycle of children. And so what are children doing, teenagers doing, to keep up with the adults? Well, they're spending their time, but they're spending their money, right? To get drugs, because actually that's what coffee is it's a liquid that comes from a bean that delivers caffeine, and caffeine is a drug. So it's a legalized drug. It's just like cocaine. It comes from a plant and they refine it, and then they have a drug, right? Caffeine, it comes from a bean, and then you have a drug. Aspirin, it comes from a plant and then they refine it and you have a drug. Actually, when you think about it, sugar functions the same way. You've got natural occurring sugar in a plant, and so they chop it up and they refine it, and sugar functions like a drug in your body. And they know these things. The adults know these things, but you know, they got to make their money, and they've got their schedules to keep. And even as Solomon said, you know, the older you get, the more likely you are to get up before the birds. You know, it's just a naturally occurring sleep cycle, you know. And so I was asking this young lady, I'm like, well, why don't you just fall asleep then? You know, today's the Sabbath, why don't you just go rest, you know? Jesus promised you rest, didn't he? And she's like, well, yeah, but the adults have this schedule. And I'm like, well, why don't you tell them about Jesus' example? And she paused a moment, and I go, don't these adults even know what Jacob's example was in Genesis? She goes, well, where in Genesis? I says, well, I think it's, chapter 7, that's where Noah's flood is at. Chapter 15, that speaks about Abraham, and then you've got Isaac and Jacob. And Jacob knew these things because he was a farmer. He dealt with sheep and animals, and you know, that truth is there. So it's after chapter 20. I didn't know the exact chapter. But we have all these artificial things that are unnatural that we're forcing. The older people are forcing on the younger people, and the younger people are even forcing on even the younger people to keep up with their sleep cycle rather than honoring and respecting the sleep cycle of other people. You know, it's really not love. But I said, well, in that example, Jacob, he knew enough, and he was talking with his brother Esau about, well, I don't want to drive the flocks or the children too hard, because if she goes, where is this? And I was like, well, it's got to be after chapter 20. And I had to look it up, and of course I got to go to some, because see, now I get up before the bird. I get up with the birds, and this thought is on my mind, so I've got to resort to some artificial light here so I can read to you. Pardon how I look, but that's how adults look in the morning before they put on all their makeup and stuff. But you know, if the children understood the Bible and they understood some stuff from nature, they would understand that the adult world has become very unnatural. Then Esau said, let us take our journey. Now, Jacob and Esau, they had a falling out, but they managed to put it back together. Sure wish all the other adults could do that. Then Esau said, and this is in Genesis 33, number 12. Then Esau said, let us take our journey. Let us Let us go, and I will go before you. But Jacob said to him, My Lord knows that the children are weak, and the flocks and the herds which are nursing are with me. And if the men should drive them hard one day, all the flocks will die. Please, let my Lord go on ahead before his servant. And these guys are showing respect to one another. I mean, here are two brothers who, they ripped each other off. They defrauded one another. They lied, but eventually they were able to overcome that, and Esau got his reward, and Jacob got his reward, and they respected it. They didn't fight and kill each other. They were brothers. They had learned to put that aside, which is really a great example for the young people. And it says, I will lead on slowly at a pace. He said, please, let my Lord go on ahead before his servant. And I will lead on slowly at a pace which the livestock that go before me and the children are able to endure, until I come to my Lord in Seir. And Esau said, Now let me leave with you some of the people who are with me. Now Esau was a warrior. He had troops with him. Jacob just had flocks. He was a farmer. He was a shepherd. But he said, What need is this? What need is there? Let me find favor in your sight, in the sight of my Lord. So Esau returned that day on his way, and Jacob journeyed to Succoth and built himself a house and made booths for his livestock. And therefore the name of the place became Succoth. I mean, it's a wonderful example for children. The old people, they settled their differences, so therefore the wives and the children and the flocks weren't damaged or destroyed. And the one person they respected, they understood. Yeah, you're right. The flocks. Yeah, if you overdrive the flocks, well, that'll cause loss and damage, and you'll hurt the children. And it's just wisdom that old people knew at one time. Yeah, you don't overdrive the flocks. And Jacob is talking about his children. Fathers, they don't want to hurt their children. Now the uncle there, he's like, well, let's do this, let's do that, and I got soldiers, and the father, he's like, oh, come on, brother. I know you're trying to be helpful, but I've got nursing flocks, I've got little children, and so you've got this father pleading for his children. And actually that's part of the reason why he was so humble with his brother, who had came out with soldiers, because he'd ripped off his older brother, his twin brother. And so he didn't want people to die. He was humble. And what a great example is that. And that's in the book of Genesis. And so I mentioned that to the young lady because, as I think about it, it probably wasn't her father that was driving her around to take drugs so that they could stay awake to keep up with their schedule. And Jesus said, well, obey me and I will give you rest. And so I brought this up to this Christian teenager. She's a Lutheran. There was a Lutheran group coming to a Lutheran church that had a Christian coffee shop. And I'm a primitive Christian. So we were talking biblical principles, and she was asking, well, where in the Bible is that? How many young people today, they don't want to be overdriven, but they take the drugs to keep up with the adults who are not following the biblical principles. How ironic. We even train our electronics to turn off so they're not wasting electricity. I think maybe that's a good place to end. We should do the same for people.